Football and Forward, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. The latest edition dropped this morning with Jeff Mosher and Adam Kaufman. But right now, joining us, as he does each and every Thursday, it's Andrew DiCecco. Check out all of his coverage of the Eagles at InsideTheBirds.com, at Andrew DiCecco on the Twitter X platform. As we are counting down, I believe it's 26, 27 hours until the Eagles are scheduled to kick off the first preseason game of the year tomorrow night against the Baltimore Ravens. You hear the game right here on 97.3 ESPN, your home for Eagles football in South Jersey. Andrew, welcome in. How you doing today?
Josh, I'm doing great. Good to be with you. Yeah, I am one of those weirdos that I actually enjoy the preseason for the evaluation standpoint to see how my assessment is throughout training camp. Some of these guys I've looked at in college, and I kind of want to see, how if my eyes still have it.
If your eyes still have it. Well, let me ask you about your eyes, okay? Because one of the questions that a lot of people are having coming in to this game, a lot of those eyes are on the defense. So talk to me first about the linebackers, because I have been curious about how they're handling linebackers. I know you can't read too much into the depth charts that are put out there by the PR team, but when you look at it, it seems to me that this is a trio going on, right? It's White, Bond, and Dean. So what has been your takeaways from those three? And then what are you looking for from those three moving forward?
Great question. So Zach Bond has been the most consistent, but he's not someone that is going to make a ton of plays, or he's just somebody who always does the right thing. He's always in the right spot. And I think that really speaks to his football acumen. And that's a big reason why, Josh, he's been the number one linebacker, or starting alongside Devin White with the first team throughout the 10 training camp practices that I've been there for. Devin White is the most talented. He is the X factor. In many ways, a key to the defense reaching its expectations this year. But I think when you see Devin White, you see an immensely athletic second-level player who can roam sideline to sideline. He's good as a blitzer, and there's a lot of trust there in him. And I think some of that is by default because Devin White is their best linebacker, but the Eagles' linebacking situation is middling, to be honest with you. But I think Devin White gives you a lot more athleticism, more so than you've ever seen before in an Eagles linebacker, at least in recent years. And I think, at least in open practice, I thought he was a tick slow in coverage. Sometimes he over-pursues plays, but by and large, he's going to be the linebacker that's on the field most of the time, given his versatile skill set. And Nakobe Dean is somebody who I've noticed being much more adept at coming downhill and attacking that way and getting after quarterbacks, where he's been able to kind of dismantle blocks in the running backs, particularly Will Shipley. He's had a really tough time handling Nakobe. But in coverage, Josh, is where he's sort of underwhelmed, I would say, particularly against Kenny Gainwell, against some of the tight ends. Grant Calcaterra has had some success working against them. So I want to see what Nakobe can do to prove that he can be a well-rounded linebacker, because if he can, well, I think he would have a chance to push Bond for that number 2 spot.
Also on defense, I know you wrote about the defensive line over at InsideTheBirds.com. I want to give it all away for people to actually read it, but I wanted to bring it up to you because of the fact that Vic Fangio clearly said, hey, those edge guys, they're not part of the D line. And we know in the past, Fangio has run some of those, 3-man D line fronts and then had the overhangs on the outside. So talk to me about those interior defensive linemen, because we know Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, but what about the other guys at that position?
Well, Milton Williams has quietly had a really good camp. He's going to be playing a much more prominent role defensively than he has in the past, and I think he's going to be able to answer the bell. Now, the question that I have is who can they lean on for depth, right? Because there's a lot of questions, especially Fletcher Cox having retired. There's a lot of uncertainty there already with some of the starters, let alone the depth. And right now, the top player and my standout this summer has been Moro Ojomo, the second-year defensive tackle from Texas. Really violent hands, exploding off the line, and I think he plays with good leverage, and he's been in the backfield an awful lot, and really showing me that he's ready to take that leap in his second season. I'm not suggesting he's going to be eating into Milton Williams snaps or anything like that, but I think he's going to have a much bigger role, and he really has to. And then the other player is Marlon Tuipulotu, who he's a solid, if unspectacular, type of player. He's more of a space eater and someone who kind of occupies blocks for other guys to make plays. But he's someone who struggled with injuries in the past couple of seasons, so you have to be able to rely on those players. And I think right now you can only rely on Moro Ojomo as far as your defensive tackle depth.
Talking with Andrew DiCecco from InsideTheBirds.com and the Inside the Birds podcast. Staying on defense, one of the contested topics we've been having on here on 97.3 ESPN, Andrew, is cornerback. Look, we know the one side, Darius Slay. Okay, fine. But the other side, Isaiah Rodgers, Keely Ringo. They drafted Quinyon Mitchell in the first round. As of August 8th, what is the Andrew DiCecco breakdown on the outside corner across from Slay?
I would say it's going to be Isaiah Rodgers, at least right now. Isaiah Rodgers has gotten 7 practices of the 10, opening with the first-team defense opposite Darius Slay. Say what you will, but, I mean, you make of it what you will, but Quinyon Mitchell has been the nickel, and he's really come on of late, looking pretty natural in that position. Obviously, you don't draft a player in the first round to be a nickel corner, but when you look at it, if you're the Eagles, how can I get my first-round pick on the field while maximizing, the potential of the defense, the athleticism? Well, I think that would be putting Quinyon at nickel and allowing someone like an Isaiah Rodgers, who doesn't really play inside, Keely Ringo certainly doesn't play inside, to get on the field. You optimize your versatility. But what I will say about Rodgers, and it's something to be mindful of, for the listeners, he's a smaller guy. He's 5'10", 175. And one thing I've noticed throughout camp is sometimes he will struggle against bigger-bodied wideouts. So A.J. Brown's going to get the best of everybody. He's one of the elite players at the position. But even someone like a Joseph Ngata has gotten him on a couple, one-on-one plays, and you really see some of these guys be able to outmuscle him. But then there's other plays in general where you see his quickness, his short area quickness, and his ability to break on the football, his recovery speed, and you see why they have him as the starter, because he has all those explosive elements. So I just would be mindful of the size.
Sticking in the secondary, to me, the defense is one of the biggest questions coming into this Eagles season. We know Bradbury's been getting reps at safety, but Fangio also said that it's been very rare for guys to make that transition and be successful from corner to safety. So what has Andrew DiCecco's eyes told him about Bradbury so far?
Well, as I expected, his length and his football instincts. He's a very sharp-minded player. I've mentioned that to you before. He sees things quickly, and I think moving him back to the safety position allows him to see the full scope of the defense and make plays on the football. So his length has really affected throws. It's narrowed throwing windows. He's been effective against tight ends. The question that I have, you're really not able to gauge until you see him in the preseason, because they're always doing thud drills in practice, is how is James Bradbury going to be able to acquit himself as an open field tackler? I think to be a third safety, which is what he would have to be, you have to also be able to play on special teams. That's not something he's done really in many years. So I don't know that the physical nature of that position really lends itself to Bradbury having a smooth transition of that position. But then again, you never know. That they could bring him in in a specialty type of role in confined spaces, going against tight ends and things like that to find value in him if he does make the team. But I think that I think he's done pretty well so far.
Talk with Andrew DiCecco as we are about 27 hours away from the Eagles' first preseason game tomorrow night. Coverage begins at 6:30 p.m. right here on 97.3 ESPN, home for Eagles football in South Jersey. Offensive side of the ball. Andrew, talk to me about right guard. Listen, I understand Hurts and Sirianni have been the hot topics in the media out there, but I want to know who's blocking for Jalen Hurts, Andrew. I want to know, is it Steen? Is it Becton? Or is there someone else who could slip in and maybe steal that job?
Well, Josh, I maintain, and I said this for a couple of months now, I maintain that's going to be Mekhi Becton. Not that, I mean, Steen losing that critical time where they were sort of neck and neck certainly didn't help him. The Eagles would love nothing more than for Tyler Steen to run away with that position, and he still may. I want to put that out there. He still may. There's time. But Becton has made it awfully tough, and I think he's sort of widened the gap ever so slightly because his transition has been relatively seamless. He doesn't have the prototypical size for guard, but I think his natural athleticism and power, and he's learning to play with leverage at that position, which isn't easy being 6'7". But you see the explosive traits, the power, certain elements that Steen doesn't really have, or at least has not exhibited to this point. And it's awfully enticing to pair Lane Johnson and Mekhi Becton on one side and Landon Dickerson and Jordan Mailata on another to give the Eagles a wall up front for Jalen Hurts. Steen's going to have an opportunity, but I think Becton has shown enough right now to give him the inside track. And yesterday, for what it's worth, he still got first team. He still ran with the first team at right guard, despite Steen being fully cleared and participating with. He was with the second team.
Any thought to the right guard position? You think the idea that, remember back in the day, they brought in Brandon Brooks as kind of like protection for Jason Kelce because he was a little undersized. Is there an idea that maybe because Juergens is a young center, he's still learning the position, that maybe you want the biggest, most bad athletes out there to kind of maybe be the bodyguards on each side of him?
Perhaps that's one school of thought. I never really viewed it that way. I think The plan was always for Cam Juergens to be the center. My understanding is he's incredibly knowledgeable, and he's not only helped Tyler Steen, who mentioned that when he spoke, but he's also helped everybody across the offensive line. He's taken on a leadership role early in training camp when there was a couple false starts. That day, it was Jordan Mailata and Cam Juergens that opted that the linemen run gassers and things like that. So I think he's ready to take on a bigger role. He's super athletic. He's good at getting in space. I just, you wonder he's had some recent injuries. He's gotten dinged up the past couple of years. That's a tough position to play. There's a lot of wear and tear there. That would be the only concern that I would have, not performance-based. I think he's going to be just fine.
Gotcha. Andrew, also on the offensive side of the ball, I want to know from you, because I know that Kellen Moore used the tight end a lot during his years in Dallas and his 1 year in Los Angeles with the Chargers. I'm going to call them San Diego. Los Angeles with the Chargers. So is that something to keep an eye on? Because I know we keep talking about who's going to be the slot receiver, but is there a possibility that the slot receiver may indirectly be the number 2 tight end in this offense?
There's a chance, and Nick Sirianni, alluded to as much. If you can think back to the spring, when the first player he named, when asked about the third wide receiver role, was Grant Calcaterra. Now, Grant Calcaterra, it's safe now to believe what you're seeing and what you're reading, because for me, with training camp, you have to always take a step back. It's never as good as you think. It's never as bad as you think. You have to figure out what's fact and what's fiction. But right now, Grant Calcaterra is the real deal. He's carried over what was a very impressive spring into the summer. He looks explosive as a route runner, detailed. He works the seam really well. He's got the confidence of all the quarterbacks. He's always where he needs to be. So it seems like maybe the light has come on in his third season. And knowing Kellen Moore and his affinity for utilizing the tight ends, I have to think that Calcaterra, who is the tight end too, by the way, he admitted as much a couple weeks ago, I think he's going to have a role. And you could see him as a result, as a byproduct of using maybe a big slot or a big receiver in that role. He could, in certain circumstances, act as that third receiver role. It doesn't have to necessarily be in the traditional sense. You could also see Saquon Barkley or Kenny Gainwell occupy that in certain instances. But I would also say Johnny Wilson's going to be involved. And the further we get here, if you're not pleased with what you're seeing, if some of these guys cause some trepidation or you don't think that they're ready to step in, you may have to look outside the organization to add somebody to fortify that. But my counter to that would be, and I said this to Mike last week, how many catches and how many yards are really are we really talking about here in an offense that already has AJ, Devontae, Dallas, Saquon? 35 catches, 40 catches maybe, 35 is probably more realistic, and 300 plus. I think if healthy, Paris Campbell can do that for you. I think there's no reason why someone like a Johnny Wilson can't do that for you. You don't need to be an all-world player, so I don't know that a trade would make the most sense.
All right, Andrew, the final division we haven't talked about is the NFC East in your divisional previews here on Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com. Let's do a quick hit on the other 3 NFC East teams. First of all, let's start with the team that was on Hard Knocks this offseason. I know they got Malik Neighbors, but is Daniel Jones going to be able to do the job without Saquon Barkley, or do you anticipate the Giants to have a rough season offensively?
I think they will have a rough season offensively. Devin Singletary is a pretty significant downgrade from Saquon, though I like they have a decent core of receivers led by Malik Neighbors. They also have Jalen Hyatt, who's there. Wan'Dale Robinson is another player who they drafted a couple of years ago. So they have young players there. I just don't think they have a quarterback consistent enough to utilize and maximize what they're able to do.
Dallas Cowboys lost 2 starters in the offensive line, lost Tony Pollard. They lost a defensive coordinator, but they still got Prescott. What are your thoughts on the Cowboys as Mike McCarthy is a lame duck coach this year?
Well, they're kind of a mess right now, to be honest. I mean, when you have so many different storylines that aren't overly positive at this point, before you've even played a meaningful game, I mean, I think that kind of encompasses the dysfunction that you normally see out of Dallas. I'm not used to seeing it this early, but I mean, your running back, you had to go back to Ezekiel Elliott. Dak Prescott's there. I mean, they added Tyler Guyton, the tackle in the draft, who I really like, but then you have the whole CeeDee Lamb situation. Is that something that's going to carry over or is that going to loom large throughout the season? How long is that going to last? Will that strain the relationship between their star receiver and the franchise? We'll have to see, but right now the optics don't look really good for the Dallas Cowboys.
Finally, down in Washington, new head coach, new quarterback. Is that enough to turn Washington around, or is year one going to be some growing pains?
I think they're going to be a team that's going to surprise some people. Now, I'm not suggesting that they're going to be a playoff team, Josh, but I think you're going to see Jaden Daniels make notable strides throughout the year. I like Terry McLaurin a lot and Jahan Dotson, the 2 wide receivers. And I just have this feeling that you're going to see they slowly started to draft better. They're piecing it together. So I think maybe next year you're going to see them really be able to make a push. I just don't think it'll be this year.
Give him a follow on the Twitter X platform at Andrew DiCecco. Check out all of his coverage of Eagles training camp over at InsideTheBirds.com. And, of course, don't forget, tomorrow night, Game 1 of the NFL preseason for the Philadelphia Eagles in Baltimore against the Ravens. They're playing the Baltimore twice this year, Andrew. So it's also maybe a little preview for you as well to see when they see the Ravens down the road, right?
Well, you're not really going to see anything. It's going to be overly vanilla, and I don't even know which starters you're going to see. So there's not a whole lot to assess. I'll be keeping my eye on a lot of the reserve players that I've seen throughout training camp and see how they hold up in a game situation.
I got you. I was trying to put a little extra spin on it, but I failed, obviously. So, Andrew, appreciate you jumping on. Have a good one, man. Keep up the great work.
You bet. Take care, Josh.